Hello, everyone, and welcome to the midweek program at the Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the education assistant here at the Arboretum, and today we are sitting underneath this beautiful Cornus wilsoniana white jade, and we are surrounded by these lovely Aspidistra elatior Asahis, because today we are doing a program, Plants for the Moonlit Garden. We are looking at plants that don't just look beautiful during the daytime, but are shining and effulgent, refulgent even in the light of the moon. We got plants with charisma at nighttime. We've got our director, Mark Weathington, here, who has pulled together a presentation for you for the best plants to brighten up your garden at night. And he's going to talk a little bit about how to maximize the beauty of your garden at a time of day when you wouldn't necessarily think to be gardening. Those of you joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I will pass things over to Mark to give a little bit of a preamble to our program before we get into the meat of our pre-recorded segment.
Sure. So, like most people who garden, well, like many people who garden, I have a job, and that keeps me at work, often late, sometimes not so late, but once the days get shorter, I don't get home until it's really getting darker. And so I take the dogs out, I walk around, but I don't get to see my garden as much as I'd like. So I have, in recent years, started thinking more about what kind of lights up the garden at night, and noticing different things. And a lot of it's going to be obvious as I talk about it, a lot of pale colored flowers and barks and leaves and things like that. And after we're through, we'll talk about some other things for the evening garden beyond just that. But this is about a moonlit garden. These are not phosphorescent plants. We've got jellyfish that glow, and I don't know, sheep that glow, rabbits that glow and things. And I think there's some plants. But we're not talking about those. We're talking about things that reflect the light that's there. And so that can be the moonlight. It can also be artificial light, whether that's a street light, light on your front porch, or it's lights out in your garden. And it can really make a garden very magical. It makes the garden completely different, makes it kind of mysterious, which I really love, that part of a garden, that people kind of shut their doors and go inside when it gets dark. But it can be a beautiful, beautiful kind of enchanting experience out at the garden if it's planted with plants that will work with that, and if it's lit naturally or artificially for that. So we'll go ahead and get it going with our pre-tape. And when we finish up, I'll answer questions. I have some other things going on. And I also, for people who stay to the end, I have a sneak preview of something here.
Something exciting. So you definitely want to stick with us until we get to the end of Mark's presentation. Here we go.
Welcome to midweek. This is something a subject I really enjoy, the moonlit garden. As the days get shorter, I get home from work. It's already, dusk or even dark outside. And one of the things I always do is every day I come home, I get the dogs, we go walking around the garden, and it's kind of my decompression time. I sometimes pull a few weeds. It's not just decompression, but that's kind of how I transition from work to home life. And when it gets dark, it gets harder to do that. And so I really like the garden in the evening. And today we're going to talk about kind of brightening the garden in the evening, the moonlit garden. Maybe we'll come back and talk a lot about some fragrant plants for the evening garden at another time. But here we're really talking about making the garden pop at night. And of course, the main way to do that is to have pale colored flowers and foliage in the garden. Vines are great, whether they're annual vines or perennial vines. This is a mandevilla vine. Usually they're bright pink, but this one is a really beautiful white one. It's tropical. It won't survive here in the garden. So you either need to bring it inside or just let it, die in place. I call that composting in situ, where you just let things go. One of the real classics in Moonlight Gardens is moonflower, which is a convolvulus, a morning glory relative that you get seed. When it gets warm out, all you got to do is soak the seed and then plant it where you want it, and it will pop up and it will grow 20 feet in a season and flower and flower and flower and then die. Often there will be seed that it has set that will come up sometimes for years and years. I had some that were coming back for a long time that I didn't necessarily want, but there you go. But this is great because you can cover an arbor, you can build a little trellis, and you get this little kind of mound of white that the moonlight reflects from. Another way to get that white in the garden is with foliage, variegated foliage, silvery foliage. Now, everybody may not want English ivy. We keep this from getting mature and fruiting, so it doesn't spread around. But the silvery sheen on here, which is real obvious in new growth, it's green with that white edge. But then, as it ages, it becomes kind of this silvery overlay to the whole leaf. And it actually, right now, in this light, doesn't show up that well, especially against kind of this pale rock. But when it's dark outside and you have lights on it, or the moonlight, it really pops. It kind of glows with this silvery glow all along here. So those are kind of the two main ways we get that, is with those pale, especially white flowers and the silvery colored flowers. And so then the next thing to think about is how you're positioning them, or how you're really accentuating them even more. So I am not really a big annuals person. I don't garden with them at home. For me, it's too much trouble to stick something in the ground, just knowing it's going to die at the end of the season. But if you want a lot of flowers, a lot of color, they're the best way to go. And it's also a good way to change up your garden. You may have a moonlit garden one year with a lot of annuals, and then something different the next year, a fiesta garden with oranges and yellows and bright colors. But I really love in a moonlight garden something like this annual begonia, this waxleaf begonia, which has a dark leaf and then the pure white flower. So what happens as it gets darker, the leaves just absolutely disappear, even more than if this was a green leaf variety, and that white just pops. And so as the light comes down, you have this carpet of white that really kind of uplights the garden. And you can plant something like this along paths in your garden, along your walkway up to your house, and all of a sudden it's almost like having path lights coming into your house over the growing season. Now, when it starts getting dark early, these die out, and so they don't last all winter. But then during the winter, you could do white pansies in their place that have that white flower that would do the same thing and light up along the walkway. So I got to talk about this plant here, mostly because it's a really weird thing that shouldn't be growing here. This plant, which again, if it has dark green leaves, so kind of disappears at night, is Clerodendron wallichii, Wallich's clerodendron. And clerodendron is mostly a tropical species. There's a handful of hardy forms that we can grow. They're often, the ones we can grow can be kind of weedy sometimes. This one has been growing here in our white garden at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum for 20 plus years. In the 17 years I've been here, I think this is the second time I've seen it flower. We keep marking it dead because some years it doesn't come up at all. And then other years it'll come up and we'll just have the foliage, and then it flowers. And I forget it's here all the time. And I'll see it and say, oh, we put another annual in here, a tropical. And then I remember, oh no, this does come up like this. But it's a really neat plant. It's probably not going to show up that much in the moonlight because the flowers kind of hang down below the leaves. But since we're talking about white flowered things, I felt like I had to talk about this, since I may not get to talk about it in flower for another 5 years. Who knows? So I talked about some of these annuals that disappear during the winter, the begonias and things. But there's some perennials which really come into their own during the winter. And this is when I really love having them in the garden. This is Cynara, which is basically an artichoke. This is the ornamental form of artichoke. Same species, just the fruit hasn't been bred to be edible. And this really loves cool weather. So how it grows is in the fall, as it's getting cooler. Right now, it's coming into growth, and it'll grow up and it'll make these huge mounds that are 4 feet across, 3 feet tall, with this beautiful silvery foliage that really, really captures the light. I have one in my garden at home, and I actually have a street light a little bit down the street and across the road, and I can look out a window at night, and this is just like this little glowing mound out in my garden. So it'll grow up the big clumps of foliage, beautiful. And then as you get into usually spring, you'll get a flower stalk that'll grow up 6 or 8 feet tall, have a beautiful purple thistle flower. When that starts dying, you'll see all the foliage dying as well. And I just cut mine completely back. It'll throw up a few leaves and look okay, not look like much during the summer, just have a few leaves that kind of come up and peter out. But then again, in the fall, it'll come back up again. Every once in a while, we'll have a very wet winter and it won't come back, but I've grown my current one for 7 years without any problem. But it's amazing for capturing that moonlight and reflecting it, because the bigger it gets, the more you see of the undersides of the leaves. So the top is silvery blue, but the bottoms are even bluer, and when or whiter. And when that stalk comes up and has that purple flower, it's almost iridescent. And while not a white flower, it really does, when the light's right, it really does kind of reflect. Now, we're talking about a lot of plants here, but there are other things you can do for the moonlit garden. This is a piece of art, a hypertufa leaf that our volunteers did, part of our leafing out art display at the garden this season. And you can see with the colors on it how much that kind of mimics these plants and will reflect the light as well. And things as simple as, a concrete bird bath that you keep clean. It can't really weather and get dark and whatever, or a piece of statuary, marble or concrete or whatever. If it's got that white, it'll help reflect that light as well. Now, perhaps my favorite plant for the moonlight garden is Agave ovatifolia. And you may have heard me talk about this before. This was one of the first plants, maybe the first or second plant I planted in my garden when I moved into my house 7 years ago. Agave ovatifolia, this is frosty blue, an especially blue form of this agave. And I'm not one of those agave people that likes every single agave. I like them when they are really symmetrical and tidy and easy. There's some that offset like crazy and people love that. I don't want that. I want mine to stay where I put it and do its thing. And this agave ovatifolia does just that. And we have it growing in just ordinary garden soil. I have mine growing in really rich soil, and they just become bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, eventually they'll flower and they die after that. They're monocarpic, which means they live for a long time, flower once, and then die. Monocarpic, one seed. So it'll be in your garden for 10, 15, 20 years before it actually flowers. So you don't have to worry about that happening fast. But everything about this just glows when the light hits it. the tops of it glow. If you have white flowers down low that are reflecting light, it reflects off the undersides of the leaves. And on a really bright night, the black tips and reddish spines stand out on there. It's beautiful. Sometimes with new leaves, and we're not seeing it on this so much, sometimes though when they come out, you'll get the imprint of these spines on the other leaves, and you can get this different texture in there as well, which is really cool in the moonlight. So foliage is always a great way to get that color reflecting for the moonlit garden. This is a hydrangea, and you can see it's variegated. It's got a white edge to the leaf, so it does pop. Now, this is an old cultivar. It actually does not flower very well as a hydrangea, but foliage alone makes it worth growing in the garden. Plants like hydrangeas that have big showy white flowers, those are good in the white garden. I find the flowers though, like the moonflower and flowers that have, kind of a flat petal, wider, that can reflect the light, are better than things with a lot of small white flowers. And that makes sense. You get more of the reflection comes off in one direction rather than being scattered. So there are some newer hydrangeas that have great big florets. I mean, 1.5 to 2 inches across, the individual petals on those sterile flowers. And those do a much better job. I also find the lace caps where you have, instead of the mop head with all the flowers, you have the lace caps with just that ring of flowers around the outside. Since those are usually all facing one direction, they reflect better for a moonlight garden as well. Now, probably undersung in the thinking about moonlight garden is bark. And back here we have a California horse chestnut, or buckeye, Aesculus californica. This thing goes completely deciduous by about July. The leaves get a leaf spot and they drop. But I love the form on it anyway, but also that bark during the winter, when I'm out here and it's a little bit darker, bark, that smooth white bark really, really reflects. And there are other trees that do that, sycamores do that. The white bark birches do that well. We don't grow white bark birches very well. They just don't like our heat and humidity. We grow river birches, which have peeling white bark, but their bark, it peels so much and it isn't really pure white that, except when they're very young, they just don't really reflect that light. It's still beautiful, but the Himalayan and northern types where it's really white bark, those do well if you're up in zone 6, zone 5, those kinds of areas. So speaking of bark, if you live up north, a plant that is known for its white bark are the quaking aspens, Populus tremuloides, that the very delicate, beautiful plants that are there. Well, we don't grow poplars very often, the true populous plants like the quaking aspens, but this is one that actually comes from Baja California area. It's called Populus monticola, so the mountain poplar. We weren't sure if it was going to survive here because of our cold, actually, but it has done fantastically well. And you can see kind of this white ribbed bark on there, and it really does reflect light as it's growing. It's kind of shocked us with how fast it grows. It isn't quite as delicate in terms of its foliage as the quaking aspen, but it does kind of weep down naturally with its branches, and the leaves do kind of put you in mind of the quaking aspen with those long petioles and kind of almost diamond-shaped leaves on there. Beautiful plant, probably not one you're going to find in your local garden center, but one that every once in a while we'll take cuttings of and root and give away or sell or otherwise distribute to people. So I don't find trees are often the best plants for the moonlight garden, although some conifers work well. But this is one that really in moonlight pops even more than it does during daytime, I think. This is an oak, a southwestern evergreen oak called Quercus hypoleucoides. Leucoides means white. So it's got dark green, blue-green tops to the leaves, but the bottom sides of the leaves are pure white. They're just shining white, silvery white color. So what you get is a lot of reflected light. Like if you have ground covers with white flowers, the begonias or something like that, it reflects up on these leaves and helps kind of shine the way. And as it gets older and you limb it up, you get more of that. You can walk under it and you get this reflected light on there. So the tree itself makes this perfect kind of dome-shaped head when young. It'll get a little bit wider when it gets older, but it's not a huge oak. It'll stay, 35 or so feet tall. It is evergreen. When the new foliage comes out, it is screaming pink before turning this nice darker color. I think it's just a fabulous tree. It likes a relatively well-drained soil, but nothing really special. It can be a little bit hard to find because it's difficult, not impossible, difficult to grow from cuttings. So you need to have a source of acorns to really get it going. But awesome tree for the moonlit garden. A classic for the moon garden are the angel's trumpets, the brugmansia, and their close relatives, Datura. This is a Datura, and it is technically it's not really hardy, although the plant will come back some years, but it'll also pop up here and there in the garden from seed. But it's got these great big flowers, and the bigger and the flatter the flower is, the better it is for reflecting moonlight. In addition, the leaves have a bit of silver to them. The stems actually have more silver than the leaves, so the whole plant kind of glows a bit in the garden. The seed pods, when they form on this species, are hard to get off the plant. Are little prickly capsules, and if you leave them in the garden, they'll break open, and you'll get these seeds will kind of self-sow. They won't go far, and birds won't move them because this is an extremely toxic plant. All parts of it are toxic. It will kill you. Don't eat this plant. Don't plant it if you have kids that will eat plants. I've never met kids that go through gardens and eat plants, but it is bitter and it will taste bad, and most people won't. The second it touches their tongue, they'll spit it out. Dogs don't eat this. They're smarter than that. It tastes bad. But do be aware that, it's kind of deadly beauty there. So be aware of that. So we talk about the moonlit garden. The truth is, during the summer, we're not getting dark until, 8 or 9 o'clock. And I, for one, am, thinking about bed more than the garden then. Those of you who like to party in the garden may be thinking earlier. So a lot of times I'm looking at plants that are flowering either late in the fall when it's nice to be out in the garden around this area where it's, there aren't mosquitoes and it's cooler and those kind of things, or early in the spring. So a plant, if you get white or pale pink or pale blue flowered forms of chrysanthemums, like this Chrysanthemum weyricki, or asters, the daisies that have these flat white flowers, these are perfect for reflecting that moonlight. And they'll form big masses, beautiful, and are really, really show pieces. We like to grow them along the edges of paths at corners to kind of give people an idea if it's, we're open and it's getting to be dusk, they can really see these and know where the paths are. So it's another great way to use them in the garden. Most of these require sun, so you do also have to make your selection that way. Now, growing with these, not looking good this time of year, but you don't notice because of all of these flowering, are some peonies. And peonies are another great plant for that big white flowers. Now, if you get red ones and pink ones and yellow ones, they don't reflect the light as well as the white ones. But if you want one of the very best peonies for the south, for our heat and humidity, where the flowers generally last for about an hour and a half, The very best one for the length of flowering time on it is an old one that's just known simply as crinkled white. And that's one that if you want it for the Moonlight Garden, I recommend that over any other one. And it's a single flower, kind of ripple petals, beautiful plant. It's got a, kind of boring name. So people go and get, Royal Hawaiian and, all these other ones with better names, Bowl of Sherbet and Bowl of Beauty and all these things. But crinkled white is just the top performer. So we're lucky here in the South because we have flowers all year round. So in the middle of winter, when it gets dark so early, we can have plants that are still beautiful. We can still go outside, still be out in that moonlit garden. And one of the best plants for that are camellias. And there are thousands of camellias, and you can get camellias that start blooming as early as almost August and finish up in, April and May, if you select them. You can get them, early, mid, late season is usually how they're designated. Sasanqua camellias, this is a Sasanqua, generally have smaller leaves, often smaller flowers, although they can be quite a bit larger than this one, and are early flowering. So if you get some Sasanquas and some Japonicas, you'll spread your flowering out almost certainly. This is one that was bred by a good friend of the Arboretum, Bobby Green, down in Alabama, Fairhope, Alabama. It's called October Magic Orchid. So the name gives you a clue of when it's going to be flowering. I really like this one. I like the smaller leaves. This is a smaller leaf than even a lot of other Sasanqua camellias have. And I like the smaller flower. I'm not somebody who likes their camellias with gigantic flowers. Nothing against that, but I actually like the smaller flowers, especially when they're like this. They're semi-double flowered, or this is almost fully double flowered. This one, October Magic Orchid, opens from pink buds to kind of pink orchid rosebud flowers, and then ages to a little bit more white with pink. And so for the moonlit garden, when it gets to this stage is really when it starts reflecting that light. Obviously, pure white flowered ones work really well or better. A couple of my favorites are some of the species that we don't normally see. We normally see Sasanquas and Japonicas and some hybrids with those, Williamsii and Hymalis and some others like that. But I love tea camellia. Tea camellia is gorgeous evergreen shrub with small white flowers. It's absolutely beautiful. You don't have to make tea out of it at all. Similar to that, but with a larger, more leathery leaf, is the oil camellia, Camellia oleifera. And that may be the hardiest of the species camellias. And what I love about that is, in addition to those white flowers, it has this beautiful, smooth cinnamon bark. So when it gets big, you can limb it up and have it as a tree. But I also grow some other very small leafed ones like Camellia transnocoensis from Taiwan, which is gorgeous. It's coming into flower in my garden at home right now. We have some here. I think it's beautiful. It's a dense, tight evergreen plant with white flowers. There's some looser open ones like Camellia fraterna and Camellia handelii, which again, small leaves, white flowers that are spectacular. So I've talked about bark, and bark is often a hard sell when you talk about plants. You get real plant nerds talk about bark, and then real people are like, what do the flowers look like? But there are some plants that everybody can get excited about the bark. And this is one. This looks like our native sycamore almost with this white bark, but this is actually a dogwood from Asia. This is Cornus wilsoniana. It's one that the Arboretum introduced as white jade, because it has the whitest bark of any that we've seen in this species. Makes a tall tree. It can be single trunked or multi-trunked like this. The bark peels off in kind of late summer, midsummer, peels off, drops to the ground, and kind of renews this really showy patchwork white bark. And this shows up, I think, almost better than something that's pure white because you have kind of these little gleams of white on it. So even in the middle of winter, it almost looks moonlight dappled, kind of like sun dappled. Beautiful plant. When you look at the foliage, you can see that dogwood kind of characteristic. One of the things with dogwoods, you can always tell a dogwood if you take a leaf and split it apart, it will dangle by little threads in there. See if I can stretch that a little bit more. That's a characteristic. I learned that years ago. Always loved doing that. But easy plant. In spring, it has big masses of white flowers that would be very nice for moonlight. Once the tree gets big, it's a little harder to see them in the moonlight, except for from a distance. And then followed by kind of blue-black berries on there. It can be evergreen in very warm climates. It is not evergreen for us, but it is beautiful. Now, I wish it had fall color like our native dogwood. It does not. We're still looking for the one that has that great fall color. We'll let you know when we find that. Now, underneath this beautiful tree and kind of highlighting it in the evening is my absolute favorite aspidistra, or cast iron plant. I learned horticulture up in the mountains, and cast iron plant I learned in house plants, section of my plant ID. And then we called it a bar room plant because you could have it in a pot in a bar that never gets any light in there, that people dump their beers in. At the time, we'd say people could put their cigarettes out in there. You can't do that in a bar anymore. And the plant would live. Now, it wouldn't grow. It would just sit there and not die. But they're fantastic garden plants. It was an eye-opener when I moved to the south, moved back from the mountains after I'd learned plants and saw you could grow cast iron plant out in the garden. This one is called Asahi. And a lot of things named Asahi in Japan, it means sunrise. Is that right? Got to check my Japanese with Blake. He keeps me honest. And the reason this is my favorite, well, it's a beautiful plant. It's got these subtle white brush tips that are on there, and it really does. When you start getting a good patch, it really does glow. And there are ones with more white, that same brush white towards the tip, that are like snowcap that has more of that white. But this was a plant I have the clearest memory of one of my early visits to the J.C. Raulston Arboretum before I worked here. Not my first visit, but an early one. I was coming through on a hot August day, and I came across a big patch of Asahi. I'd never seen it before, and it literally almost made me drop to my knees. It just that spectacular to me. I had just never seen something like it, and blew me away. So I grow a lot of aspidistra personally. It's one of my personal favorite plants. But Asahi has a special place in my heart because of that experience. So aspidistra are super easy to grow. You put them in shade. They'll tolerate dry shade once they're established. You can grow them in pots. They're great for growing in pots. You need to cut back the foliage if you have a cold winter. But what I've found is, and this can change how you grow them, is if you cut all the foliage off before new foliage starts coming, which is the easiest way to do it, your plants will stay shorter. Your new leaves will come up shorter. Now, if you wait before cutting off the leaves till the foliage, which comes up kind of spiraled together, wrapped together, if you wait until that is up tall enough to make it a real pain to cut, because you have to go through and carefully cut each individual one, your plants will get taller. These were cut off, so they're staying nice and low right now. Asahi will get another half or more again taller than this if you treat it that way. A lot of these aspidistra are yellow spotted, and sometimes people don't like that look, but this is a little more subtle than that, and I think just absolutely one of the greatest plants for the Moonlight garden, or any garden.
Awesome. That was great. Thank you so much, Mark, for taking us through that.
A lot of fun. And I was looking, thinking about Asahi and looking back at when I had seen it and taken some pictures, and realized that our plants actually come from J.C. Raulston's 1985 visit to Korea,
Sure.
to South Korea, where they brought, it was a Japanese cultivar, but they brought some back with them from that.
That's really special. I love that.
And oddly enough, the same day I was looking at just yesterday, in fact, I received in the mail a little metal kind of pendant that's the Korea National Museum on one side, and on the other side, J.C. Ralston, 1985, September 1985, that a friend, Dan Hinckley, had for some reason. He didn't know why he had it, but he mailed it back to us.
No kidding.
So, all these odd things. So
That's really special. Those of you that aren't aware, J.C. Ralston actually wrote about his trip to Korea, the 1985 expedition, and all of those writings are available on our website. I will put a link in the description of this video where you can read through his whole trip to Korea, the whole collecting trip, all the places that they went, all the plants that they saw. And I love that he picked up this Asahi during that trip, because I also have always loved this particular cultivar, and just to hear that he picked it up there, that's really
there's
neat.
some great pictures of him in Korea with pots of this. Fun fact, he went in August, September, but he wrote about what he was going to do on his trip in the July 1985 newsletter.
Sure.
Which didn't actually get sent out or anything until after he came back. And so it's kind of annotated with the actual notes from the trip beyond so it's the planning and the execution.
That's awesome.
Because sometimes those newsletters didn't get out on time.
Yeah, every once in a while.
It's happened more recently than that. So
Sure.
yeah. Do we have any questions?
The questions were about specific plants.
Okay.
I've answered them in the chat. They asked about the artichoke. Is that the same as cardoon?
Yes. Cardoon is the edible form of artichoke. Artichoke is the edible form of cardoon. It's a cardoon that has been bred to have, to be meatier and have more substance there. You talk about the moonlit garden. I was really focusing on the light, but there are other things out there. There are an awful lot of plants that are fragrant later in the day into the evening. There's a daylily called Hemerocallis lilioasphodelus, that is sometimes called the commuter daylily. It's a nice, just little yellow one, because it's fragrant at the end of the day as the sun's going down. So that's why it's the commuter's daylily. I find osmanthus to be most fragrant in the evenings. A plant that I'm really interested in playing with more, I was at a good friend's garden, and he had a climbing hydrangea anomala, that he had collected on Yakushima Island when he collected there many years ago. And we were in his garden in the evening. It was 2 consecutive nights I was staying with him down in Atlanta. And the first night I smelled a gardenia and didn't think much about it. I'm not a big gardenia fan. They're great, but it's just not my thing.
Different strokes, I guess.
Yeah, but it's the fragrance, I like. But so the next night we were standing out there, and I said, that gardenia I'm smelling, that's almost making me reconsider my stance on gardenias. And he said, I don't have any gardenias.
Oh.
And so we walked around the garden, and it was in the same spot I had smelled it. And it wound up being this climbing hydrangea that was in flower and was fragrant. And I've never smelled hydrangea fragrant like that. I mean, I really thought it was a gardenia. And it was one of those that was easier to smell from 5 or 10 feet away than right up close. But it was definitely that plant.
Sure.
So we've got some hydrangea anomala Yakushima fragrant in the nursery, little rooted cuttings.
Okay.
And hydrangea anomala can take a while to flower.
Sure.
But we're gonna grow it out and see if it retains that characteristic. But it was definitely only in the evening. So there are plants like that.
Yeah.
And plants which open up. There's some perennial tobaccos.
Huh.
It has real long tubular white flowers.
Sure.
And when it's in bloom and it's growing, I leave in the morning and I'm like, I really ought to just rip that out. It's all the flowers are kind of closed and hanging down. It doesn't matter how much water it gets. It looks kind of,
Yeah, tobacco's bad for you, Mark.
Yeah. And come home and, 3, 4 o'clock still doesn't look like much. And you turn around about 4:30 or 5 and the thing is just boom. All those flowers are up. It's fragrant.
Wow.
It's beautiful.
Sure.
And it always kind of stops me from ripping it out because it's only during the rest of the day.
Cool. We did have a couple questions that came in. Carol wants to know if she can grow aspidistra in the DC region.
Certainly in the city you can.
Okay.
Now, not all of them. There are a lot of species, and they're from different places. But Aspidistra elatior, which is what Asahi is the most going to be the most cold hardy for you, most likely. Certainly, zone 7, no problem. But if you get into zone 6, they can be tough. You could try it with some pretty heavy mulch on there. But I would think, plant it in the spring, give it a good full season to grow, sure. Mulch it well that first winter or so, and I think, yeah.
Nice. Okay, and Jared had a question. He wants to know, is Hydrangea anomala the same as Schizophragma hydrangioides?
No.
Ooh.
Schizophragma hydrangioides is another climbing hydrangea, and in fact now it is Hydrangea hydrangioides. They moved everything into hydrangea.
Wow, well that doesn't make it confusing.
But Schizophragma, you can tell the difference between them. Schizophragma hydrangioides is quicker growing and quicker to come into flower, at a younger age.
Yeah.
But when it flowers, the plants formerly known as Schizophragma. There's still Schizophragma here. We have not changed them. We've had the discussion, but part of the reason we have not is because I can tell them apart at 100 yards if they're in flower. The Schizophragma will have kind of a oval, petal kind of to their. You have the lace cap, and the flowers will have this oval petal to them, or petaloid, the infertile flower, whereas the Hydrangea anomala will have that lace cap, but then it'll have the little 4-petaled sterile flowers around the outside. So they're very easy to tell apart in flower. Yeah. A little more difficult otherwise. Sure. Apparently, genetically, they're all the same. And that goes for just about every plant that is related to hydrangea have all been lumped into hydrangea.
Huh. Okay.
Our native Decumaria and the evergreen Pileostegia and just all kinds of things.
Well, geez, it's not even fair. They just keep changing it on us.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Well, that looks like that's all the questions that have come in. But Mark, you've got something very important to share.
Yes.
With everybody.
This is from way back before, maybe 15 minutes before we got started today. These arrived. I'm going to give you one to hold up so we can hold them both up.
Okay.
Our brand new 2026 T-shirts. We have got the variegated Quercus glauca Shima Fu with the variegated leaves up there. We've got the very that's an Asian evergreen oak. Then we've got the on the top, the bluish kind of with the small holly-looking leaves is a very endangered, restricted habitat Western North American species called Quercus turbinella. Kind of a shrubby little evergreen species. And then down at the bottom, we have one of the always most remarkable on trees at the Arboretum, and that's another Japanese oak, Quercus dentata pinnatophyta. It's got very deeply cut leaves, and that one's showing it in flower.
For sure.
And then on the back
is all kinds of beautiful, particularly for us plant nerds.
We have our list of oaks in the Arboretum.
Yes.
And we have some acorns there.
Yes.
Including Quercus insignis, which we do have growing in the garden. It dies back to the ground almost every winter, but it's still growing. But it has the largest acorns. They're like baseballs.
Is that little squat, the tiny little oak that's like 4 foot tall?
No, that Quercus japonica, the real stout one. That's japonica.
Okay.
Quercus insignis, I could show you, but it's a couple of stems up.
Oh, geez.
It's very cool. It grows in Mexico and down into Costa Rica and places. But yeah, have these very cool acorns in there, and then the flower of Quercus filioides,
for sure,
Emerald Sentinel, which going back to JC and Korea, coincidentally enough, that was the oak that he collected there. It's the equivalent of our live oak, Quercus virginiana, and Emerald Sentinel is more upright and easier to propagate than other forms. So, and it says at the top, the Arboretum in the City of Oaks, because if you don't know, J.C. Ralston here is in Raleigh, and Raleigh is known as the City of Oaks. So, not available right this minute, but will be available very shortly. Keep an eye out on your email if you're a member, and Instagram. And we will mail these shirts, but we just do it on certain occasions, and we'll put it out there when we do. But often when we have a plant auction and we're mailing plants, we'll put this on the kind of the auction site, and you can just buy it and get it shipped out.
Yes.
So if you're joining us from somewhere else, keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's important stuff. These are very hip shirts.
And you are seeing this before. This is being displayed before any of our staff have seen these.
Honestly, yeah, this was the first I got to see them. And Marilyn is asking what colors they come in, and the short sleeve is the navy heather, and then the long sleeve is berry is the official color. So that's great. Absolutely wonderful. Okay. Mark, you got any idea where Jared might be able to get a Quercus glauca shimafu? He wants to know if it's available anywhere. Says the plant looks amazing.
So, yes, actually I do. I was about to say, no, you can't get it anywhere unless we propagate it. But Garden Treasures in Wendell, North Carolina, I know they have propagated from our plant.
Sure.
So they should have some, unless they've sold them all.
That happens. Same goes for Cornus wilsoniana, only they've sold them all. We just checked before this program started. But great plants all around. Definitely worth snagging when you can.
And we're really trying to get Cornus wilsoniana, white jade. We have some major tree producers who have it, but it takes a while to bulk up numbers to offer it from wholesale.
For sure. But that's okay. Us gardeners are patient.
That's right.
We can wait for it. We'll get there. Great. Well, that appears to be all the questions that have come in today. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark, for pulling together this presentation and helping filling in the loose ends there, too.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, everybody, for joining us on the midweek program today. We will be back again next week with another pre-recorded segment. We're going to be looking at the color trials throughout the growing season with Tim and Bernadette. So make sure you join us for that. It will be absolutely delightful. We hope we will see you then. Y'all take care.